Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the Jesuits in Wisconsin, specifically Father Rene Menard, and we're going to key in on this phrase, paving the way. So, if you remember from last week, we talked about Father Marquette and Joliet and how they made their way in Nicolet's steps, and they found that the Mississippi River makes it all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. They're the ones who had the peace pipe that kept them safe near St. Louis. And Father Marquette was a Jesuit priest. So I wanted to spend some time talking about what was a Jesuit or who are the Jesuits. Um, they were priests and they were Christian in their background, but they weren't just preachers. They were belonged to an order or a club, and in order to become and be considered a Jesuit, you had to live by some certain rules. They took some vows. One of the vows was to teach their religion to other people, and but the other thing that made them unique was they took a vow to live in poverty as they did their teaching, which meant that they would have no personal possessions or wealth, and they would own no property. They would just make do with what was provided for them. And so when the Europeans discovered the New World um, and found the indigenous native people there, the Jesuits wanted to share their word and their belief system with these people who had never heard it before. And so they came. And not only were they teachers, they also built missions. And a mission is kind of like a school, kind of like a church and a school. And they kind of considered it a home base. They taught indigenous people there. They healed them if they were sick, fed them if they were hungry. And the French actually used them too as interpreters and peacemakers. And they were far more than just preachers. They became very important to uh, the French and to some of the indigenous peoples as well. So let's get to Father Menard. Father Rene Menard was born in 1605 in France and died in 1660 in what would become Wisconsin. And he first came to Quebec kind of like Marquette, although Father Menard was here long before Marquette. I don't think Marquette arrived until about 4 or 5 years after Menard passed away. But anyway, whenever any of the Jesuits came to Quebec, they sent them to live with the indigenous people that were friendly in the St. Lawrence River area. So Menard learned and lived with the Huron, the Nipissing, the Cayuga, and the Oneida, and learned their customs and their ways and their languages. And again, learning that language allowed him to interpret for the French and interpret between the tribes to help keep the peace. And he was pretty good at it, and in 1660 got sent on a mission. He traveled along with Radisson and Grolier, who were two very famous French explorers around the Great Lakes. Um, and he got separated from them near what would become Ashland, Wisconsin. And it's here that he built the very first mission. And it was basically a birch and branch hut on the shores. And he spent a very, very difficult and harsh winter near Ashland, begging food from the indigenous people there and living off of a soup of boiled moss that he wrote about in that journal. Again, keeping accurate journals and records is really important to help us understand how these folks lived. Well, he survived that winter and became friends with the people there and heard about a starving camp of Huron Indians further south into what was Wisconsin. And so he and another French fur trader who came along decided to go and visit them. And, Menard only had a bag of, I think it was dried meat and sturgeon. He didn't have much, but he went to go share that with them and also share his beliefs. And about a day from the village, he and his fur trade partner were crossing a rapids and he stepped out to lighten the load and was never seen again. But a couple of months later, they found his robes and his diary with some Dakota indigenous people. And they never learned what happened, but they definitely got his records from that. And today we honor and remember Father Menard as the very first Jesuit or black robe. They called them black robes because of the robes they wore. That was an indigenous term. We remember him because the relationships he built with the native people around made it possible for more French to come and meet with those indigenous peoples. So we remember Father Menard, the first black robe, who built the first mission in Wisconsin. Thanks.